Now, with the latest victim being a woman police constable, we're clearly seeing a significant impact on the police service by this pandemic. When it comes to being essential, there are positives and there are negatives. The positive is that you get to work, you get to make a living, you get to carry on making a living, while people whose jobs were considered as being not essential, they don't have that privilege, they don't have that opportunity. But it should be kept in mind that the reason we are in this position in the first place, and the reason there is something called essential workers and something called non-essential workers, is because we are in the midst of a pandemic that is killing people. And especially on that side, on the side of deaths, Trinidad is having a close experience with that. And that may be one of the things that makes the pandemic situation in Trinidad seem so much more serious and so much more grave. Because every day we're losing a continuous number of people, averaging somewhere in the lower teens. And for every day to be hearing that number of people dead because of a pandemic, it makes the entire situation a lot more real. But the problems we're seeing now in the police service and the number of infections we're seeing and the number of unfortunate deaths we're seeing, that's symptomatic of something that could cause a much greater disaster in the long run. Because if it is that the essential services, the services that we deem must remain functional, must remain working and open, if it is found that within these essential services is where we're finding some of the most spreads and some of the fastest spreads and some of the most dangerous spreads, then that makes handling it all the more difficult, because lockdown in that case is no longer an option. You don't have the option of stopping this. So now we must actually think through and find creative solutions to see if there's a possible way to stop this, or if this is just one of the risks of that job, being that it is already a high-risk job. WPC passes away at Couva Hospital. Police Commissioner Gary Griffith, the executive and officers of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, TTPS, have expressed condolences to the family of WPC Nakila Thomas. She was 27 and passed away around 7:30 yesterday at the Couva Hospital. And you know, when I read this story, I'm thinking about the multiple stories of deaths we're having. And you understand from the media's perspective, they're trying to make sure that the population has knowledge of how personally this is affecting so many families, that each death here, when you see someone and you see their picture and you see a little story about it, it tells you that this person was alive, that this was a life, this was attached to so many different people. But another problem I'm seeing as we're inundated with so much information about so much tragedy and loss, it could have sometimes the opposite effect, where after seeing it so many times, it could start to feel nearly normal, where we're hearing 14 people died yesterday, and it's just what it is. It has become just part of the daily news, and we can become accustomed to this. And really and truly, we can become accustomed to a lot. When you think back on some of the different situations that humans would have been surviving in and living in and thriving in, there would be some people that would have been living in a jungle where 50% of all the children born would be dying, and they were accustomed to that and they were living with that. It could be amazing the level of sorrow and disaster and tragedy that humans can become accustomed to. And that's a very important part of our survival. If you're thrown into different situations, you must be able to adapt and become accustomed to a different thing. But that adaptive method that allows us to become accustomed to so many different things as we encounter different situations could make certain things like a pandemic and the level of alertness that we need to maintain in order to keep ahead of this, it could make maintaining that level of alertness a little more difficult. So the one WPC who died could just be taken and hidden among the numbers and just another statistic. But when we follow the trend and we're seeing that just last week, one more officer falls victim to COVID-19. This was June the 10th. So it wasn't really last week, that was 3 days ago. Yet another police officer has succumbed to COVID-19. Acting Assistant Superintendent of Police Anil Manik, 48, passed away at 6:25 on Wednesday. So indeed that was last week after all. So last week another officer died, and I was looking to find what is the total number of officers died due to COVID, and most of the articles aren't even running a number for that officially anymore. I had to go back to an article 3 officers ago, and just by seeing that, it tells a really grave story. It paints a very serious picture of what is going on in Trinidad. 3 officers ago, an article I have to go back to. Another cop dies from COVID-19. This is from 11 days ago. And when we go down to the end of this article, we see that the police officer that died, his name was Sergeant Harvey, and he was the 6th officer to die from COVID. And by my check since then, I could be wrong, I could have missed some, but by my check since then, at least 2 more officers died. So add 2 more on to those previous 6, and we have 8 total officers dying. And that's on top of the 260 police officers who've tested positive and the over 1,000 officers in quarantine. And I'm not sure if I'm just not paying attention to the right channels, but I don't feel like I'm hearing enough people speak about this. I heard from the Police Social and Welfare Organization, basically the police union. They had a proposal of paying $1 million to the families of each officer who passed away due to the COVID-19 virus and due to the pandemic. And that's a proposal, and the Minister of National Security says that no decision has been made on it yet. And when I'm thinking about it, I understand the motivation to have such a suggestion, but when you're thinking about it, the police aren't the only people making sacrifices in this time. So maybe if such a thing is given to them, then such a thing would have to be offered to a wider range of public servants and a wider range of people making sacrifices and a wider range of people who may be facing losses during this time. That's not to take away from the fact that the police do have a legitimate increase in the amount of danger they face, but I'm not sure if it can be justified to only give such a grant out to the police officers without extending it to others. And then when you reach the point of extending it to others, it's only so many $1 million grants our government could give. So the fact that they would have to give out too many may actually make it very, very difficult to give out any at all. And either way, a grant is after the person has already passed. So you won't be able to save this person's life. You won't be able to stop them from spreading the virus to whoever they may have spread it to. You won't be able to do anything to actually curtail the pandemic now. You may be able to make life easier for the officer's family, but that doesn't help the pandemic. And what I'm trying to find out is if there's any possible way for us to find solutions to make it safer for the officers and make it safer for the country as a whole. Because what could happen is officers can become vectors for this virus. Because police officers would be those in a unique position that can find themselves in many different places around the country in close personal contact with many different people. Because of the nature of a police officer's job, some people, they wouldn't be able to maintain social distancing if they're trying to arrest someone. So they need to get close and personal. And then the same officer may have such an interaction with 6 different people from 6 different parts in the country. And if this officer has COVID, worse yet, if they're asymptomatic and they don't even know, they could be spreading this virus all around the country, and the country is remaining in lockdown. No one is working, no one is moving around. We just have our essential services doing their essential duties, and the virus still spreads, and that could very well be how it's spreading. But what could possibly be a solution to that matter? When I think about the predicament that the police service and the police officers find themselves in, I think about just sometimes the unsolvable nature of some of the problems we face in society. So police officers have to deal with crime, they have to deal with people who do not want to listen and who do not want to be cooperative with general society. And because of that, it makes a societal appeal to these people pointless. It doesn't make sense you appeal to the criminals. Listen, it's a pandemic time. Let's have care for the police officers and decrease the level of crime you do. And when you hear an officer call you, stop everything you're doing and come calmly, arrest yourself, sit in the back of the van, don't spit on anyone, don't speak loudly. You can't do that with a criminal. They're a criminal, they don't care. In fact, now, because they know that there may be some heightened fear and heightened caution due to the pandemic, whoever may be a criminal may be seeking ways that they can use that to their advantage. They're a criminal after all. And because of that, I think if we're looking for solutions for the police service, what we need to do is take whatever we think are solutions for the general public and make sure we enforce them to the exact line and commandment within the police service. If you're already in the police service, you're already supposed to be someone that should be accustomed to discipline. And to me, when I'm looking out and I'm seeing the police all around and driving around, very often you're seeing police without masks. So if we're saying that the masks can stop this, then all police officers should have mask mandates very strictly enforced on them. All police officers should have all of their whereabouts very strictly monitored. Because if we're saying that this situation is so serious, this pandemic is such a serious situation, that we're giving these same police officers the authority to go into someone's private property and make sure they remain there, then it can likewise be so serious for our society to now give ourselves the authority to implement on these same police officers the same strictness that they're implementing on the wider society. And I think it's a bad showing that when we look out, we're seeing that police officers aren't maintaining even the most lax recommended measures. They aren't wearing masks. You're seeing many officers congregating in small areas. And I think that shows a symptom of Trinidad and Tobago's general police culture. Now, don't get me wrong. This isn't a criticism of all police. Of course, it's not all police that are bad, but it's obvious to me that Trinidad has a police culture where many officers have an attitude where they believe they're above the law, they're above the rules, and they're there to implement the rules to those lower than them. And the rules don't exactly apply to them. Well, in this situation, we're seeing that the consequences for breaking these rules, and it's not just the consequences for breaking these rules, like to necessarily put the blame for getting and contracting the virus on any officer who contracts it, but they're already in a position of heightened danger and heightened risk. So any mistake or lapse in protocol could be much more severely punished in such a situation. So I don't know, maybe the vaccination drives that are picking up speed now, we could possibly see the police service vaccinated, and this may protect them in the future. Because beside that, I'm not sure what other measure can be put in place to decrease this. I could understand the worry that some police officers may be having, because it may not necessarily be you. It could be another officer, and you're just in this station here. Another officer brought the virus into the police station, and we know how a lot of our police stations have gotten so comfortable over time, and they're air conditioned and closed, and we found out also over time that that's just the condition that the COVID virus enjoys spreading in. So drop a comment and tell me what you think. Tell me where you see hope for our police service. Tell me if you see hope for our police service. Tell me if you don't think that the situation they're in is that significant in the first place. And then tell me if you see any solutions possible for this particular problem. Don't forget to like the video if you like the video. If you don't, comment also and tell me why you don't like it. And share the video to your friends. It increases the audience, it increases the reach. And it could also be a great conversation starter. Well, if you like conversing with people, that is. Thank you for watching. I'll see you tomorrow in the next video.
And you feel the music, rising with the time.